Now that we've had some experience working with how single blog posts are displayed, let's turn our attention to looking at groups of blog posts. And the first template we're going to look at here is home.php. Now, home.php falls back to index.php if it's not available, but what it does if it is there is work as the blog homepage. So inside of the customizer, you could select, hey, should I have my latest blog posts on the homepage? In which point then this home.php would work. But you could also say, hey, assign my blog posts to another page and display them there, and then home.php will apply there. So let's take a look at these situations where it will show up and how we could code one out. Okay, so if I come to my site and under the customizer come into static front page, what I was talking about is you could either show your latest posts, and this will call in the home.php template. Or you could set a static page and put your posts page assigned to some other page on your site. So if this is the case, and this is how it's set up when we click on blog, that will display the home.php. Now, right now, we don't have a home.php, so index.php is being used. And that's what we'll use to start modifying and working with displaying something a little bit nicer here. So what we're going to do is come into our index.php because that's our most base level one, and it's what the home.php falls back to. So it makes sense that we build off of that one. And I'm just going to do a save as and save this as home.php. Okay, so I'll update that here, and now we could jump back into our site. And if we come to the blog page, scroll all the way down, we should see, okay, yes, we're using home.php. Great, just as we would expect. And now we could turn our attention to what else we could do with it. So one of the first things that you notice is that it doesn't say, this is my blog page. It just says, hey, these are all sticky. Or not, these are all sticky. Sticky is the first post. That's a sticky post. It just lists the titles there. It doesn't give us any context. So one nice thing that we could do at the top is just throw in a kind of hard-coded page title. So one of the ways that we could kind of come up with a solution around this is we could either hard code blog title, or we could get the title of the page itself using WP title. Now, this is something that we could use outside of the loop, and it will automatically grab whatever is up here. So whatever the name of the page is. And because we named this page blog, or I did, and it's assigned there, then we could pull that in using that. So if we come into our home.php inside of our main, and we just do an H1 with a PHP WP title, let's take a look at what that's doing. Notice that that's going to display these two arrows and blog, which kind of looks cool, but it's not really what we want. And that's because when you use WP title, it's expecting to put out separators. So for example, up here, it wants to separate the description between the name of the page, or the title of the site between the name of the page. So we could remove that by adding one of the parameters, a separator. If we put in a space here, notice that it's going to default to this. But if we just come in and add an empty parameter like that, notice how this goes away. So blog, okay, that's a little bit helpful. Let's move on to something else that could be really helpful. I'm kind of getting frustrated at this point that notice how all of these posts, you can't link to them, which is kind of getting frustrated, and it's displaying all the content. So what if we switch to having a link, but you could also have maybe that excerpt going on as well? So there's a number of different ways we could approach this. We could use conditional tags. We could create new templates. So let's jump into our code and look at one solution that we could take to this. So the first thing is that if we know that we're on the home page, we could go ahead and instead of just grabbing the main content, we could create a new template. So we could do something like content dash loop or content dash posts. And if we do dash posts, then we know, hey, this is going to be multiple posts, and we're going to format it a little bit differently with a link and an excerpt instead. So let's do that. Let's open up content, and let's do save as and content dash posts. So that's just going to give us a hint that this is plural. And the only thing we're going to change here is we're going to take this H1 tag, turn it into an H2 tag, and then add a permalink inside of it. So this is another really great function you'll learn really well, and that is the permalink. So what did I do here? I added a link, and inside of it, I've got some PHP, and I'm echoing out the permalink, and that will turn this into a link. So if I come into home, let's do content-posts, and then come back into our theme and check that out. So notice that something might have gone wrong here. If I look at what the link is for this, it'll become apparent what I did. Ahref PHP the permalink. What's going on there? Well, this was just a little error on my part. Notice that this whole thing is already PHP, so we don't need to open another PHP block. So the first thing we have to do is just remove that PHP there. Okay. Now the other thing is we can't call this function in this way. We're actually going to change it up a little bit. And not all of this is stuff that you would be expected to know at this point, but we're going to put escape URL, and then instead of the permalink, we're going to put get permalink. Now the permalink will echo it out onto page. Get permalink will allow us to pass it in as a value here. And the last thing we have to do is some concatenation. So I'm going to wrap this whole thing inside of single quotes and concatenate it. Okay, let's back up and explain what's going on here. So first of all, we have the title, we have the H2. When it comes to this href, this is closing this string. So this is one string, and then we're concatenating it or connecting it to the escaped permalink, and then we're concatenating that to the end of the quotation mark, and we got to throw in the end to our anchor tag. So if we come back to our page now, we will see a big error. Oh, spelled permalink wrong. That's right. Okay, let's spell it correctly here. Okay, and now we should see that when we click on these, it comes in and takes us to the other page. So this is really helpful. That's making everything a little bit nicer. Now, something I have to point out, we did cause a bit of a problem here. Notice that in our home.php, we say content-posts and then get post format. So it's never going to find content-gallery. So we have a potential issue here. One is that if we're on a single.php template and we include get post format here, this is going to show up if it's a single version of it. However, and the same is true for, let's just say it's a standard blog post, content is going to be used, right? But then if it's a looped post, this is going to be used. So in some ways, we need to distinguish this, and it is possible to have both of these in the same file with conditional tags, and we'll take a look at that approach later. But what I want to point out now is that this one will no longer load inside of our home. It will work if we're looking at a single one. So you may be stuck with possibly having to duplicate this potentially. So you could do something like save this as post-gallery. And then where we have the title here, let's grab the title that we came up with previously. We'll copy that and drop it into posts gallery and replace this here. And now in our home section, this will work as well, and the content gallery will stand for a single one. But the problem with this approach is that then if, let's imagine you were doing one of these for every post format, you'd end up with duplicate of both of those, which is like 10 files. So for this reason, there's also the approach I'm actually going to talk about more in the template tag section, where we could use conditional tags to prevent ourselves from having to do a duplicate of a bunch of these files. So I'm going to leave this here for now and just re-summarize. Again, we're in the situation now where single is calling content and anything hyphenated from content. So it's calling for single pages content and content-gallery. But then if we're inside of our loop on our blog page, then it's going to pull in a different format of it, a completely different file, content posts, as well as any content posts gallery. So this is going to be our loop, and you may decide, hey, I want a bunch of separate files, or when we come back to template tags later, you may decide, hey, I want to use one more complex file and run some conditional statements. And then you could do some tests to see which one is actually faster. So then you could weigh the speed versus the size and number of files. And then, of course, all of that against your own preference and what's easiest for you. So at this point, we've covered a lot here with the home.php, but we're not quite done. There's one last little tidbit change we wanted to make, and that is inside content posts. Instead of doing the content, we're going to do the excerpt, and we're going to take this out because we don't want comments displaying if it's inside of the post being linked from the homepage. So now I could come back. You could see it's excerpted down. Everything's linkable. If there's still this happening, then that's being used. So post formats are working, but then notice that it's also, or remember that it's also displaying a different template in each scenario. So there we have our blog post looking pretty good. We'll throw one last thing down here, and that's pagination. So if we come into our home, what we want to do is come to the end of our while loop, or come to the end of our loop completely, and we'll just throw down pagination here. So we'll just say PHP echo pagination links. I'm sorry, it's not pagination, it's paginate. So paginate links. And now we could see we've got the links down at the bottom there. We could scroll through. We're not saying at the top what page we're on, and we'll come back to template tags and look at this a bit more. But now we're at a pretty good point. We've done a bit more work here. Our blog is looking a little bit nicer thanks to these additions. So we'll wrap up here. Go ahead, implement what we've done in your own theme, create a home.php, play around with maybe loading different types of templates depending on where you're at, and then also apply this to your own. Think about how you want your page to look. Think about the difference between displaying a single post versus one that's just inside of the loop here, whether you want excerpt, whether you want that same metadata, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so go ahead and do that, and then we'll shift into a discussion of archives and different other home.php related templates.